Hello, everybody. My name is Kathy Feingold. I am the lending director for Rural LISC. I am joined by Brittany Mitchell. She is a program officer in the lending division of Rural LISC, and we do have a guest with us today, Daniel Wallace from Coastal Enterprises. We are excited to be able to meet with you and give you a general overview of what our creative capital and lending programs look like. So I guess if you could go to the next slide. So our agenda today will really be to just give a brief overview of Rural LISC, what we focus on, talk about creative capital, talk about the types of projects we finance, which I think will be interesting. And then we're really going to focus just on lending products. We're going to give an overview of the lending process to give you an idea of what to expect. And then with Daniel here, we're really going to focus and put a spotlight on a program we have called the USDA Community Facilities Relending Program. And I think this is going to be really special because there's probably a lot of questions about this program, what it can be used for, how it works, how we work with the USDA. So at that point, we're going to open it up to questions. And I guess next slide. So we always want to start out with Rural LISC mission statements. So I won't read this to you, but essentially we support resilient and inclusive rural communities. They're great places to live, work, play, and innovate. And what we try to do is create integrated strategies and programs to focus on what we call our 5 pillars. Can you go to the next slide, please? So creative capital supports the funding needs of 4 other pillars in the Rural LISC work we do. So one of those pillars is broadband and infrastructure. We find that broadband is really something that can be lacking in rural communities, and we have a really strong program with digital skilling and broadband infrastructure. Of course, we focus on workforce development and small business supports. A large focus of our work is on disaster solutions. And then I think everybody knows that a big part of the work LISC does, and really the bread and butter of the work we do, is affordable housing. LISC is known for its technical assistance and capacity building support towards some of these programs. And as always, diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice is paramount to what we do. Next slide, please. So creative capital is a term that really stands for the type of financial support that we can provide for all the housing, community facilities, small businesses, and community development projects. And that can come in the form of grants, loans, and equity. In addition, of course, to the technical support that we provide. But today's webinar is really going to focus on more of the flexible loan options we have. So we can go to the next slide.
So these are some of the types of projects that we finance. As you can see, we provide financing for a wide range of projects. As Kathy had mentioned a moment ago, our bread and butter and the most common type of project that we see is affordable housing. And that includes multifamily rental housing as well as for sale housing. But we also finance the acquisition and construction of commercial and mixed use real estate projects, as well as economic development loans. And we have, for small businesses, we have microloans of up to $15,000 available through our Kiva program. And we also finance high quality charter schools that offer educational choice to low-income families in historically underperforming school districts, as well as through the CDFI's Healthy Food Financing Initiative, or HFFI. LISC provides financing for projects that increase access to healthy food. And primarily we do that through supermarkets or food co-ops in federally designated food deserts. But we also provide financing for community-based healthcare facilities nationwide, as well as the development of improvement of early childhood centers serving low-income families. And as we mentioned before, Daniel will go over later in the slide the community facilities loans and the funds in regards to that. So these are the core components of LISC financing to consider when making a loan request. Really trying to get a good understanding of the project and the purpose and what you want to do and why you want to do it and who it's benefiting. LISC also really looks to cultivate relationships, not only with historic partnerships that we have, but as well as new relationships. So our loans don't only go to the partners that we already have. And then the other core component is money in and money out. We just really need to understand how LISC dollars will be used in the project and how those loan funds will be repaid, what the source is, as well as the timing of the repayment. And of course, we are rural LISC. So a big important part is that is location. So our projects that our team funds must be in rural areas. However, rural LISC's definition of rural can be flexible, more so than the USDA definition. So here you'll just see, I'm not going to read all of them to you, but you'll see some of the questions here that ruralists we may ask to determine if your project qualifies as rural.
Next slide, please. Yes, thank you. So rural LISC as well, has the benefit of LISC National using their lending products. And I'll just go to the next slide to say that we can provide a product for almost every stage of the project that you're working on. Next slide, please. So if you're talking about a typical real estate project, we can provide pre-development funds, acquisition funds, which are normally interest only, construction funding, again, interest only, site development, but we also offer permanent funds, mini permanent funds. What we can do very often is have one loan that goes from construction to perm or mini perm as one single loan that just converts to an amortizing loan. We can bridge finance, which sometimes it's bridging outstanding grants or bridging equity for a LIHTC deal. And then with our small business lending products, we can often provide working capital and leasehold improvements for fixtures, furniture, and equipment. Next slide, please. So we weren't going to spend too much time today on lending terms. We do have a chart on our website that you can refer to that gives you an idea of lending terms, but terms are really so specific for each project, including rates and terms and amortizations. So it really helps to just have a conversation with a nonprofit or a developer about what kind of terms we can offer for a specific project. But what really can help us is that we occasionally have these special funding resources that can assist for affordable housing, developers either that are minority or serving minority communities, as well as community facilities. And these funds can either serve as credit enhancement where they can mitigate risk, allowing us to be a little more flexible in our underwriting standards, or sometimes they can blend down interest rates, which can make us a little more competitive. So next slide, please. I do know that there are probably some questions about our lending products, which will open it up very shortly, but I Would be remiss in not mentioning our affiliates, National Equity Fund and New Market Support Company. National Equity Fund, an affiliate of LISC, one of the largest nonprofit LIHTC syndicators in the country. We work with them very closely. Sometimes we can be a resource to just refer a project to them, make sure that they can price out a project for you, or sometimes we can even be part of the capital stack in some way, whether it's providing acquisition or pre-development funding for a LIHTC deal, or providing a LIHTC bridge. So we participate in many LIHTC deals. Also, New Market Support Company, they are our LISC's New Market Tax Credit syndicator. And they work in rural communities and actually have a mandate to work in rural communities. So we are always working closely with them to find, innovative and transformative rural projects. Generally, a new market tax credit project has to cost at least $5 million to make sense, and it has to be in a qualified census tract. But if you have a larger project, these are mostly economic development type projects. They're generally not housing related. We would love to be able to talk to you about that opportunity. Next slide, please.
So here we're breaking down what to expect in our lending process. So these are the steps that and the general timelines of that. So first, we like to kick things off with a meeting with potential borrowers to hear more about their project and how it meets those core components of LISC lending that we mentioned earlier. And then following that conversation, if it seems like it's maybe a good fit for LISC, we'll then bring the project to our national underwriting team through a process that we call intake. And during intake, we complete a high-level analysis to see if we can proceed to a full underwriting of the loan request. And we submit that once per week. And then the following week, our national team will review it and let us know whether it's greenlit to go into full underwriting, if they have more questions, or if it's just not a good fit for LISC lending. Then in the full underwriting process typically takes around 3 to 6 weeks, depending on the complexity of the loan and the loan type. And this is when we really get a full list of due diligence from the borrower and meet with the borrower as needed as questions arise throughout the underwriting process. Then similarly to the intake process, once that underwriting is complete, we submit that's what we call a request for program action. We submit that once per week, and the credit committee meets weekly to review it and to go over a decision. If it reaches an approval, then about within a week or two of a loan approval, a loan approval notification letter or commitment letter will be issued. And then loan closing typically takes between 4 to 6 weeks after that loan approval notification letter is signed and the good faith deposit is received. But all these timelines can vary, again, depending on the complexity of the loan. Next slide, please.
Thanks, Brittany. So I am excited today to have an opportunity to talk about a product that we really would love to use more. It is called the USDA Community Facilities Relender Program. And what that means is that rural LISC can use funds borrowed from the USDA to relend to applicants in rural communities to purchase, construct, and or improve essential community facilities. I think, we say here we can also purchase equipment and pay project-related expenses. And essential community facilities, there are a number of them. We're being real brief here to say that that can include healthcare facilities, public facilities. I mean, for example, police stations, fire engines, community social or cultural services, and even street improvements. Next slide, please. So very excited to have Daniel Wallace, Chief Investment Officer from Coastal Enterprises, Inc. out of Maine. Coastal Enterprises is a nonprofit CDFI. They've been around since 1977. They work in rural regions and communities in Maine, doing incredible work. They've been very successful with the USDA Community Facilities Relending Program. They are also a rural LISC partner, and we are excited to have the expertise that Daniel can bring to us today to shine a little spotlight a little more on this program to get that information out to you. Welcome, Daniel.
Thank you, Kathy. I had a little trouble getting unmuted there, but I'm here now. Great to be here with everyone this afternoon. One of my extraordinary lenders is actually also quietly observing. So Emma, I would invite you to plug things into the chat that I might overlook or that might need a little more explanation as we go. I appreciate that. You definitely need to change the slide, please, so I'm not looking at my headshot any longer. Yeah, so the Community Facilities Relending Program, it's kind of an interesting creature. It actually dates back to late 2016, early 2017, and there's a 10-year deployment window for all of us who are relenders. CEI is a relender, Rural LISC is a relender. So we have a few more years to go, but not a whole lot of time. But one reason, just to state sort of off the top, why this might be a more interesting option to folks now relative to, say, 5 years ago, is that this product really does run in direct parallel, in a sense, you could say, in direct competition with the USDA Community Facilities Direct Lending Program. And the reason we may be more competitive now is just what the interest rate environment has done. So a few years ago, the USDA was providing the capital to the relenders at the same cost that they were doing their own loans directly to borrowers. But that rate has changed. I did neglect to look up what it is now, but we are more competitive. The other reason, other highlight and thing folks should really think about here is that this is, I'm not sure exactly, Kathy, how LISC is structuring the deals, but it's potentially up to 30-year fixed rate financing, which is pretty hard to come by and pretty hard to find, and is the eligible borrowers, in sort of alignment with what Kathy just discussed, are nonprofit organizations, municipal entities, and tribal entities. So the opportunity there is for an organization to lock in at a relatively low rate. CEI is at about 5.25% with these deals. I'm not sure what LISC is doing, and hopefully that didn't just cause lots of challenges, Kathy, but we're doing them at 5.25%. Our money is almost out. But locking that in for 30 years in today's market is really pretty remarkable. The program guidelines, we've already talked briefly about eligible uses and eligible borrowers. There are the great benefit to this program is that USDA is much less hands-on than they are in a lot of their other programs. Not that engagement is not good, but it really relies on the relender to do the diligence and the underwriting, collateral, structure. So, you know, LISC, it would follow LISC parameters, or in my case, of course, CEI's parameters for how the deal gets underwritten. The USDA does get involved in 3 ways: in an eligibility concurrence, an architectural review, and an environmental review. So we'll get to all of those in a minute. Another headline, just to make sure I don't lose it. is that the engagement with the USDA via, via LISC, the lender, is state by state. Yeah, this is a great slide. Thanks. This is a good slide to make this comment. So the rural development group in your state, sorry, Frank, CEI's money is almost out. LISC, I believe, has a pool of capital remaining that Kathy could speak to. It's my organization's money is almost obligated. You need to work with each rural development office in whatever state the lending is happening in, as well as in LISC's case, their HQ. So for us in Maine, we work with our Maine Rural Development Office along with the Rural Development Office in whatever state the deal is in. So there is that consideration that you're working with a couple of different offices that, at the end of the day, this program is kind of a one-off. So not every rural development office has put a lot of time into figuring out how it works. So it is worth knowing that those engagements with the state RD can sometimes take some time and have a learning curve on their end. All right, I talked about the direct lending funds already. We're more competitive now. CF Relending does function more like USDA's guarantee programs. That's what I was speaking about in terms of the underwriting protocols. The program is based on this NOSA that's quite old now from 2016. And meeting these requirements that I mentioned, and I'll get into eligibility, architectural, and environmental, can add a little bit of cost to the project. 25 might be a little bit steep, but it potentially for a complicated project might be up that high. What do we have on the next slide? Yeah, so here we go. Let's get into each of the buckets. Funds need to go to towns with less than 20,000 people. That's one of USDA's rural definitions. 50% of the funds have to go to high poverty census tracts or persistent poverty counties. And the other elements we've touched on already. I would say that a hurdle is the last bullet there. You can't, it's not unusual for government sourced funds at all, but you can't use CFRP for construction. And most of what my organization has seen is construction. So basically you need to walk through the USDA process as part of underwriting. The lender, LISC, CEI, whoever it might be, needs to close, or somebody else needs to close on some kind of construction or bridge financing. And then the USDA money, once construction is complete, comes in and replaces that bridge lending or that construction lending. So what we've done a few different mechanisms, but mostly we've found ways to fund that construction ourselves just to keep it simple. And then we draw down the USDA money when construction is complete. I think I'll touch briefly on let's go to the next one. Actually, the next slide is good. I want to spend more time on each of the three pillars of what USDA has to do. They have to look at eligibility. Typically, this is fairly simple, and my organization accomplishes it with a 1 or 2 page template letter that we send to the Rural Development Office. It says where the project is, the population, whether or not it's eligible under the poverty guidelines. It's just half a dozen indicators. The borrower in CEI's case has always been a nonprofit entity, always. So we also send along the organizational documents of the nonprofit entity. This is because the most, complicated part of eligibility review is the OGC review of your borrower's corporate documents. Now, the lender is going to facilitate that interaction. But what is that? The Office of Government Counsel needs to look at those documents and just make sure they're in order. For us in Maine, we've had this incredible opportunity to work with our state RD, who's been very responsive and very quick. And we've been able to get eligibility and OGC reviews turned around in a matter of sometimes days, but just a few weeks. To be clear, and I haven't been following everything in the chat, that is not the experience of everybody across the country. Some folks that has taken a much longer period of time. The other aspect here is it doesn't look like I managed to get an architectural bullet on the slide. That's probably okay because the architectural review is the lowest speed bump, the lowest hurdle. The USDA just needs to opine that the project is modest in design and construction. Whatever is getting built is not the project architect's, like signature building. It's a straightforward, simple public use building. And there is something called a PAR, preliminary architectural review, that goes along with that. That's relatively straightforward. I say that, but on some projects, the USDA's architect will dig in and ask some questions, but mostly our experience has been very streamlined there. Environmental review looks like probably what a lot of folks already experience. Certainly phase one on a number of projects, but you're also looking at a number of factors that you might anticipate. Wetlands, certain endangered species. Is the project going to be placed on prime farmland? You need to have the Historic Preservation Office in your state look at the plans and sign off on them. You need to engage with any tribal entities in your state. So that checklist is relatively long. And I say here 30 days. I'm sorry, Kathy, that's a mistake. It's a minimum of 45 days. Oh, to assemble. Yeah, it takes about 30 days to assemble, but there are some documents that have to go out to all these other parties, like IF&W, Inland Fisheries and Wildlife, or NRCS, Natural Resource Conservation Service. Anyway, you've got to give them some time to get back to you. So there is some lead time there. Phase one is usually required. I have not had to do a phase two on anything yet, but that's just because I've had good phase ones. Okay, great. Next slide, please. Oh my goodness. Okay, the wide open slide. So I think this is I want to spend a minute actually talking about what we've done with our allocation, and then just provide a few sort of comments and get right to questions. So to try to ground this, we've done or obligated 9 projects so far out of our $20 million allocation. I use the word obligated specifically because we have not drawn down from the USDA on all of those projects, but we're obligated to 9 for almost $18 million. They range from YMCAs to federally qualified health centers. So we did 2 YMCAs, we did 2 FQHCs. We've done a nonprofit school, nonprofit educational institution. We are working on 2 nonprofit childcares. So that's a good opportunity. And then we've also done, actually, which makes sense for Maine, we were able to support preserving a piece of working waterfront with this capital to a nonprofit foundation borrower. So those are the groups we've worked with. We've ended up doing most of our work right here in our home state in Maine. We've done 1 project in Oregon and 1 project in New York. It takes a little while to pull these together. You need to add a month or 2 to your diligence and underwriting to get through that USDA process. It's very, very helpful, Kathy, Brittany, for the lender to really get in the weeds and take hold of the project with the USDA to keep things moving along. The last thing I guess I would like to say is just one thing that it took us many years to figure out, but has been catalytic on a couple of larger projects, is with some careful deal structuring, you can use CFRP capital alongside or with new market tax credit structures. So offering source loans, leverage loans. I am not a new market tax credit expert at all, but we have been able to do this twice now and manage it. And it's really a nice way, because oftentimes those of you who may know new markets far better than I'm told it can be quite hard to find that leverage lending. So this could be an opportunity to round out those capital stacks. So I feel like I've probably talked a little bit too much, but would just be curious to hear what folks have for questions. And I'll open up the chat, or maybe Kathy, you can tell me what.
Yeah, I will just interject to not only thank Daniel, you know, just to say that rural LISC has not been able to deploy our relending funds as well as Coastal Enterprises has. So I believe we do have 20 million, you know, as the program term sort of comes to a close. I think Daniel was right that it's now probably about 30-year funds. But I know that we often are finding that there are opportunities to potentially use these funds, and so really wanted to get this information out there. I hope we didn't scare you with some of the hurdles that have to be crossed, but Brittany and I are ready and willing to support that journey. And I also, just before we go to questions, wanted to mention that Daniel is right with the interest rate environment as it is. Our funds are actually more attractive than I think what typical lending rates could be right now. So that makes it even more advantageous. So with that, I will open it up for questions. I think the best way to do that is through the question and answer or chat functions. The question and answer might be the best way to do that. So feel free to type in your question. I just want to say to Sharon in her Northwoods of Wisconsin that it's not too hot. I'm in Chicago. It is 95 degrees. So it is sweltering here. So I don't know if anyone else is dealing with the heat wave today. Let's see. Okay, we have a question from Sharon. How are census tract qualifications determined? Their organization works in a rural tribal community, but the non-tribal private homeowners which dominate these regions are wealthy residents with $500,000 to multi-million-dollar home values. The incomes for the county populations reflect this income disparity. Daniel, do you think you can address that, or?
Well, the short answer is I downloaded the information from the USDA a while back. So, and I can share that with Kathy if she doesn't have them. And I just refer to that spreadsheet by census tract. I mean, the thing to keep in mind is that only 50% of the funds need to be targeted to specific areas related to the persistent poverty or the high poverty census tracts. So there's still opportunity to do the deals in a number of geographies, as long as it's 20,000 or fewer people.
Thank you, Daniel. So Frank Hodges has asked us, can you tell us more about the typical loan amounts, terms from CFRP that will come from LISC? And I will say, I might toss it over to Daniel just to talk about what makes sense for loan amounts for going through this process. I know that I think at least interest rates right now for LISC are under 5%. So, you know, based on our commitment with the USDA. So that is, I know, very attractive in this interest rate environment. But Daniel, if you could speak to, does it make sense for loan? I mean, I think we're open to any loan amount within that range of what we have, but does it make sense to maybe have a certain loan amount to make it worth the effort to go through the
Yeah.
process?
Yeah, I mean, there are two things to so first off, to be direct, the smallest loan we've done in this program is 650,000. The largest participation, well, actually, the largest loan we've done is 3.1 million. We participated at, well, okay, excuse me. You can't participate under this program. If you work with another lender, you have to do side-by-side loans. That's a headache for LISC and unfortunate, but that's just the way it works. So the largest deal that we've engaged in was 7,000. The calculation for what deal size makes sense is sort of twofold. Can the project absorb that $15,000 to $20,000 in extra cost? And can the project absorb the time to get it underwritten and engage with the USDA and the extra effort with the Rural Development Office, with the project architect? And we usually, I didn't explain this, but we usually work primarily with the project civil engineer on the environmental piece. So I guess that leads to a third component. Does your project have a civil engineer, an architect, and all these other folks involved? I mean, I have tended to say as a rough threshold, about $500,000. But that is kind of rough. I mean, theoretically, you could certainly go below that.
Thanks. Annie Forrest asks, can you stack these loans with new markets, tax credits, and other types of federal tax credits? I think, Daniel, you mentioned you have paired the community facilities program with new markets, although I don't think any of us on this panel can speak to the legal complexities of that, but it can be used as part of the leverage loan, is my understanding.
It can. It can. And just to be clear, just in case there's any confusion on the question, this is not a tax credit. You can stack it with tax credits. We did look at one project that ultimately was ineligible for this capital, that was going to use both new markets and historic tax credits. So you can really, and it was not ineligible because of the historic tax credits. It was ineligible for another reason. But you can layer it up. You can absolutely layer it up. And Frank, I'm sorry, I don't remember what I was saying when I said 7,000. So if you could put more in your question, or maybe Kathy remembers.
I think you said the largest project you did was 7,000. Did you mean 7 million?
Oh, 7 million. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I don't see any other questions in the chat at this time. And you can ask any questions about community facilities program or LISC general lending program. Maybe I'll give just one more minute for questions. And yes, we will share this slide deck with participants. So that should be forthcoming. I think we might have another question. Do any of your housing programs provide loans for workforce housing? Yes. So we basically are only required to support projects that 20% of the units are at 80% of area median income, and others can be at a higher rate. Now, of course, we support projects that are more affordable, but we are seeing, especially in rural areas, that the missing middle or workforce housing is becoming more important. So it can be for rental and for sale housing, that at least 20% of the units are at 80% of AMI, but they can go higher than that. I don't know if we have any other questions. Oh, here we go. Kim, who do I speak with from your organization to discuss? Oh, potential lending needs and options. We would love to speak with you, Kim. Again, well, why don't we put that last slide up again, Keegan, if you don't mind. It does have all three of our email addresses. Yes, we are always interested in speaking to potential borrowers about projects to make sure not only that it's something we can support, but you know what type of financing terms we can provide. Let's see, through RD, you get a loan and a grant for a community facility project. Does LISC provide the grant funds? Unfortunately, the community facilities relending program is really just a loan program. So I think there are benefits, as I think Daniel mentioned, to going directly with USDA and going through their direct loan program. I don't know what their current rates are. But I think that might be one of the reasons it's becoming more advantageous to go through a relender, because their rates are probably based on what the Federal Reserve is doing more than what our fixed rates are. I don't know if we have any other questions here, but thank you, everyone. So glad you could join us today, and would love to hear from you if you have a project that you are thinking you might need some loan funds for, and we'll send out this deck to everybody. And yes, stay cool out there, everybody. It's really crazy out there. And again, just want to thank Daniel from Coastal Enterprises for joining us today. I think we might have one more question here, and we still have time, so I'm going to address this. Melissa runs a 501c3 nonprofit trying to build a children's home and community center. What are the grant programs that were mentioned on one of the first slides? Okay, Melissa, why don't you contact me directly? We do at LISC have a child care division, and I can reach out to them to see if there are any grant opportunities for you. Make sure you have time to jot down that email address. All right, everybody. Well, thank you, and very much look forward to hearing from some of you. And if you have additional questions, feel free to email Brittany or myself. And anything about the community facilities program, I won't force you to reach out to Daniel, or I can certainly ask him myself. But thank you and have a great afternoon.